Are there children who are non-responsive, who cannot be turned around? And what are some of the characteristics of the moms who turn symptoms like stimming, sleepless nights, picky eating, sensory issues, eloping, aggression, ritualistic behavior, and sleep issues? What are some of the characteristics of the moms who do that and the moms who are not able to do that? That's a question that I get a lot. And if you've followed this channel, you've seen the moms who managed to do that. You've seen my story maybe. And you're wondering, how do I avoid falling into the category of the non-responders? And can that even be done? Well, we'll look at that today from a spiritual perspective, from a neurological perspective, from an emotional perspective, so that you can do everything in your power to not become one of the cases of the non-responsive. So let's dive in. But before we do that, I would love for you to subscribe to this channel and rate it and share it with someone, because the more you do that, the higher it gets in the algorithm, and the more I can spread this message to all the moms who have zero hope, just like I didn't before I turned my son's symptoms around between 2004 and 2008. So if you do that, I'll be really happy, and another mom will get this information too. So let's get started. There are two types of cases where I really see no results for these moms. And the interesting part is that it has very little to do with the child and a lot to do with the mom. And this is not to say it's your fault or to create more guilt. This is to say, and by the end of this video, I'll tell you exactly what to do to avoid falling into these traps, because it will prevent turnarounds. It will prevent your child from getting to a better place. Type number one, mom, what is the reason why I cannot help this mom until we get this fixed? Well, there's something that I've seen over and over and over again over the past 16 years of working with moms. I've had 10,000 of clients over the years since I started this. I turned my own son's symptoms around between 2004 and 2008. All glory to God. But what happens is that when you are in this state, you tend to get addicted to problems. You might think, what? Addicted to problems? Addicted to autism problems? Yes, two things going on. One is that when you are experiencing a lot of chaos, and we were just talking about how the brain will start to maintain something that it knows really well, something that is safe, something that isn't too different, because when it's in fight and flight, it will look at any change as threatening to your life. It will look at any change as, well, it might as well be a lion chasing you, because it can't really tell the difference between autism stress and a lion chasing you. So it wants to maintain or get back to something really familiar. In your case, the familiar situation, your well-known dysfunctional familiarity is autism, sleepless nights, screaming, eloping. It's a lot of chaos. It's a lot of drama. And so your body is used to being flooded with adrenaline, flooded with cortisol, and it will try to maintain that. So it sounds crazy, but it's actually really logical from a biological survival state. So don't blame yourself, because you're actually trying to save yourself and your family. It's just not working for you. So you will try to maintain chaos, and that turns you into a problem addict, or you get addicted to autism problems. So every time you find a solution or a practitioner or something that works, you'll find another problem or another symptom to treat or something else to look out for. Or you'll abandon the project and start something new. So you'll go from practitioner to practitioner to practitioner, from diet to diet, from therapy to therapy, with no lasting results. And so when we are flooded with adrenaline and cortisol, it's actually some really stimulating effects in the body, and it feels stimulating, and it can become addictive, so that you will create chaos on the outside to maintain that chaos that you know really well. And this is something that I'm not going to talk about in this video, because it's something that I work with my moms on, and it takes more time than I can cover in a video. But sometimes we create chaos on the outside to detach and distract us from a pain that we have on the inside, from childhood trauma or something traumatic in life that we are not ready to face or heal. But this addiction to problems is really an addiction to adrenaline, addiction to cortisol, an addiction to familiarity, because the brain is not ready to bypass that failure mechanism. And I know how you can bypass that failure mechanism through specific exercises and through specific emotional and trauma and nervous system healing modalities. So why is this a problem and what is going on behind the scenes? It's a real problem, and it leads to you wasting years, maybe months, maybe often years, on looking for practitioners and wondering, and diets and solutions and detox baths and homeopathy and whatever it is that you're looking for, and nothing works. Because behind the scenes, you're making sure that nothing works. And so you'll ask yourself, why is nothing working for me when it works for other people? And you get more and more discouraged, and you lose faith, you lose hope in the fact that anything will work, which of course is not true. It's just that your brain needs to be in a different place. Your nervous system needs to change as well. Also because your child mimics your nervous system. Your child mimics your breathing pattern, your heart rate. So if you're in stress, fight and flight, it affects your immune system, your nervous system, your gut, your detoxification pathways negatively, because stress does. And when your child is mimicking that, your child's gut, immune system and detoxification abilities will be impaired. And so you do all these things, but in reality it's not working because your nervous system is out of whack as well. So you are looking for experts out there instead of becoming an expert. You are thinking that you're solving a solution while you're actually reinforcing neurological, emotional, and spiritual distractions that will never get you there. So that's mom number one, and stay tuned to the end of this video for me to reveal how to deal with this and what to do instead. But let's get to mom type number two, who will not see results and who I cannot help until she changes this. Case number two that is almost resistant towards change. In fact, I don't think I've ever helped anyone who's in this category. This is why you must avoid falling into this category. I almost did right after I got the diagnosis, because that's the route we are going. If we're just following mainstream, if we're just following the diagnosis and then jumping into all the autism communities, autism mom organizations, this is who we will become. And that will not lead to any change, because that whole system is set up for one thing and one thing only, is for you to stay hopeless, dependent, and thinking that there's nothing you can do, because that system has nothing to offer except for coping strategies and therapies. So the mom who's in this category, the characteristics will be that they kind of fall into two different categories. This mom has existed right back from the beginning when I had my son diagnosed. These are the moms that you meet when you get the diagnosis and you get into all these self-help groups inside the autism organizations. But the two categories, I remember I read Jenny McCarthy's book about how she tried to turn her child's symptoms around, and she called it the woe is me moms. So they are either, if you find them on social media, they'll be, and it's so peculiar to me now with the way that I look at autism now, which is God's plan for you to change, God shaping you through adversity and challenges so that you can change, so that the child can change, so that God can be glorified through that change. So this type of mom either focuses a lot on how hard it is to be an autism mom. I believe it's because she believes in there's nothing you can do. That's what she's been told by the people who diagnosed her child. That's what she's being told by other moms in the same situation. And she either is too overwhelmed or too uninformed, which is to no fault of her own, about the facts that you can do things by addressing the underlying messages behind autism symptoms. Let's just mention a couple. Copper toxicity, copper overload can cause symptoms like rigidity, stimming, and the aggression and the tantrums. Undermethylation, which is based on the database of urine and blood analysis from non-profit organizations, the research work done by William Walsh and Carl Pfeiffer, thousands and thousands, over 6,000 cases, just with the ADHD type of symptoms, show that 95 at least % of children with autism symptoms, the classic autism symptoms like the Kenner autism symptoms, are undermethylated, which means that the activity of neurotransmitters and enzymes and hormones which affect behavior, learning, development, detoxification, and health, that's not working for them. And there are so many things you can do nutritionally and biochemically, biomedically, epigenetically in order to address that underlying problem. And when you do, things tend to change for these children. And the earlier you begin this process, the better. In fact, what he says is that you can get a child that's 1 year old more results in a month than you can get a child that's 6 years old, results that you can get for a child that's 6 years old in 2 years. So of course early intervention is key, which is why you don't want to fall into this category, because you're going to waste a lot of time doing ABA therapy or coping strategies, OT and speech therapy, which might be great afterwards, but not when you urgently need to deal with the biomedical imbalances that are causing these symptoms. So this mom will either be focusing on how hard it is, and it is. If we're not changing the diet, if we're not changing lifestyle, if we're not changing the environment that got us sick, epigenetic means above genes. The insults in the environment and in the lifestyle and the food can affect the expression of DNA, the genes, so that it can either turn on good genes or bad genes, turn on good behavior or bad behavior. So we can do a lot with lifestyle changes, a lot with food, a lot by addressing the gut, by balancing the methylation, by understanding how to address metal dysregulation, copper overload. And often, according to William Walsh, according to Dr. Behrens, who is teaching inside my membership, it's often the excess of nutrients or nutrient overload, such as copper overload and folate, that cause more issues and more problems and more symptoms for these children than deficiencies. Of course, you need to address both, but most people just look at the deficiencies and they don't understand that the overloads are even more important to understand. So these two moms, they either focus on how hard it is to be an autism mom, how little society understands how hard it is, and how they're not getting the help that they need, how their children are not understood. And that's honestly, even though I understand why you would want inclusion, it's just a question of time. A child that is violent, eloping, jumping in front of cars, my child did the same thing, stimming, not being able to speak, not being able to go towards an independent future, not being able to understand social skills, not being able to voice their needs and boundaries. It's a very bad situation that only gets worse over time. And trying to appeal to or get society to understand and communicate with these individuals, that we're just getting more and more people with these symptoms year after year. So it's much more prevalent than when my son was turned around. And it's not due to better diagnosis. I'm sorry. It's due to the environmental insults, the epigenetic insults, and the fact that no one's really looking at what are the underlying messages behind autism symptoms. So yes, it will get worse, and it's not the solution to try and get society to communicate with these children who cannot communicate, because it's this child, I believe, because I believe that God gave us this challenge. I believe that these children are pointing towards things in society, in food industries, in modern lifestyle indoors, in this whole artificial world that we live in. They are pointing towards the things that aren't working. And if we as moms are just feeling like it's such a burden and we get into this victim mentality, instead of listening to the child saying something's got to change in our lives, it's almost like it's also part of this group of moms. There's not a huge motivation for changing the diet. They say, oh, I did that, and then they actually didn't, because they didn't address the full spectrum of what needs to change in order for the diet to even work. You need to do it for a whole year. You need to do it yourself, become an expert in interpreting the symptoms that you get from the child through lived experience, by being an expert in interpreting the symptoms that come from your body. And so it is not sustainable to try and change society for your child to fit into society, because these children are stimming, they cannot speak. Some of them are aggressive and violent and have tantrums. They are screaming, they're throwing themselves at the floor, and we think, oh, it's horrible that people are staring at us. But we are the only ones who can love our children enough to stand and live through that as they grow. So when the child gets to teenage years and adult years, it becomes really problematic. That's why many of these children end up in institutions, prison, addiction, and the main cause of death, I read the other day, is drowning, because they don't have this sense of danger and risky behavior and how to avoid it. And so at some point, you are either not there to protect your child, or the job will be too much, and we want to avoid these children getting into these institutions at any cost, because the amount of stories that come out from these institutions about how they're losing authority, how they're being treated really badly and locked up and not loved through the many challenges that they have. And it's almost like these children are in a burning house with us. Your child is in a burning house with you. It knows what caused the fire, and it knows that you have the key to unlock the door and take you and that child into freedom, away from these symptoms. Because I believe these children know that something is going on in environment, something is going on spiritually, a spiritual attack that wants to destroy you and your family and your child's future and your ability to fulfill the path that God has chosen for you. The child knows that you're living a life that is not part of that plan. And it sees you staying in that burning house, asking society to accept that you're in a burning house and help you while you are the one with the key. So again, you're looking for someone or something outside of yourself to solve this or make this easier, while it's only going to get more complicated and difficult until you become that expert who takes your child and yourself out of the danger zone by addressing the underlying messages behind autism symptoms. So, what are the steps you need to take to avoid becoming one of the recovery resistant moms who will not see changes no matter what they do? Number one, you got to change your mindset. You got to think about this as a message, a second chance, a gift where you are being shown areas in your life that's not working through symptoms. And it's forcing you to change your life, your diet, your lifestyle, the way you think, the way you parent. And if you look at focusing on the child and on symptoms, you kill the messenger, and you will miss out on the messages behind the symptoms if you try to kill or bind or treat, totally focused on diets and practitioners and supplements to get rid of the symptoms. The first step is to understand that you need the symptoms in order to understand what happened and what needs to change. And you cannot, that's step number 2, delegate that understanding or that job to a practitioner. You cannot use another mom's experience, because that's her child with that child's messages for her, not you. And so you really need to understand that you are not supposed to get rid of the symptoms until you've understood what the message behind the symptom is for you. And you're not supposed to delegate the responsibility by going to practitioners or diets or supplements or protocols or detoxes or whatever it is, trying to find people or experts out here to get rid of the symptom that you need to understand. Instead, you need to become the expert in reading your child's symptoms and getting to a place where you know exactly what works for your child and what doesn't work for your child. If you don't know what that is, come and see me. Let me just plug in my microphone because the sound has not been good until now because I didn't have my microphone plugged in. Write me an email, contact@barefootautismwarriors.com, and we will figure out what the message is for you in your child. So that's the main things you need to change. And then you need to stop wasting time looking for solutions outside of yourself. Stop looking for practitioners because they won't have the answer for your child. You have to become the collector of the puzzle pieces for the complete healing puzzle for your child. Number 3 is that you need to change your brain, because if you're in fight and flight and your nervous system is all whacked, you will not be able to accept change. No matter how well your child will become, if you change, your brain will deny it. And it will happen subtly. You won't even notice these self-sabotage patterns. The brain will always maintain status quo. It will always maintain a familiar situation, even though that familiar situation for you is tantrums, screaming, sleepless nights, eloping. Your brain will maintain that until you have a calm nervous system and until you're not in fight and flight anymore. That's why we need to work on your nervous system, your healing and your peace before we can even get to your child. It's that famous putting that oxygen mask on yourself first, because if you don't, your child will perish. And finally, you cannot allow yourself to get into this learned helplessness and hopelessness and victim mentality that is so common in the autism mom community. If you believe there's nothing you can do, if you let people tell you there's nothing you can do, which they will, because they don't know how to deal with methylation, nature deficiency, the messages behind the symptoms, pyrrole disorder, metal dysregulation, gut issues, neuroinflammation, the things that you need to understand and become an expert in as well. So they'll tell you there's nothing you can do. If you believe that, that's exactly what you're going to make happen, because you're just going to go through the coping strategies, the behavioral therapies, the OT and speech, which will not deal with the underlying root cause, and it will confirm what they say. Nothing is changing, and your child will just be at status quo throughout life. You cannot afford that. So stay away from the autism organizations and the autism mom communities that say there's nothing you can do, that keep on feeding their children processed foods, gluten, glutamates, dairy, that do not know about these underlying biochemical issues, spiritual issues, and spiritual attacks. Understand that this is also a spiritual attack. The dark side wants you destroyed, wants your child sick, want to keep your child in autism, want your child to be tempted into this ideology and pride movement, and you as well. But pride is a sin, pride is a distraction, and it will turn you away from the plan that God has for you through these symptoms. You need to stop thinking, why me, God? And you need to stop praying for God to remove the messages that He's sending you and start listening to those messages and let them change you. He's sending you challenges to shape you and change you. And then finally, the whole idea of acceptance, the t-shirts, the pride movement, and the victim mentality. Acceptance and coping strategies without action leads to stagnation, meaning the child, the symptoms that you have right now, you'll have that when the child is in teenage years and an adult. And you got to ask yourself, is that what I want? Or do I want to learn to turn every single stone to get my child to the best possible outcome? Knowing that I have done everything that I can do to remove the triggers that are currently causing symptoms, just to make sure that I've done what I can do to help my child to get to more independence in the future. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, subscribe to make sure to get notified when I make a new one, and rate this video as well. Leave me a comment, share it with someone, and give it a like, because it really helps push it up in the algorithm, and it really helps getting this message out to the moms that have absolutely no hope. See you soon.